On mute.
Thank you for attending today's New York City Department of Education's Beyond Access Forum. This event is brought to you by the DOE Division of Specialized Instruction and Student Support and the Office of Digital Inclusion and the New York City School Library System. Special thank you to our partners. Be sure to visit their booths throughout the day. I'd like to take a moment to remind everyone to log into the Conference Hub using the link sent in your confirmation email. Once you're logged in, you can visit a partner booth to learn about their offerings and book a meeting or live chat with them. Network with all of today's attendees via the registrant directory and chat features. You'll also be able to gain access to all of the conference resources in the resource section. Be sure to enter our Passport to Prizes. Throughout the Conference Hub, you'll find several buttons to enter yourself into our Passport to Prizes. Each time you find a button, you'll fill out the form. You'll earn one entry into the raffle. All entries are eligible for a series of prize drawings, only one prize per participant. We will announce each winner via email at the end of the conference. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions for our presenters during the session, please submit them through the Zoom chat feature. You have the option to turn on closed captioning by clicking Show Subtitle within your Zoom console. Be sure to use the conference hashtag NYC Schools Inclusion in your social posts. I'll also circulate a link in the chat right after the presenters start so you can fill out a form to earn your CTLE credit. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Thank you, Navi. And welcome everyone to the forum. This session is a great session, and we're going to be here with our Office of Supervisors of School Psychologists, talking today about the completing the data-driven assessments to support LRE recommendations. I'm really, really excited, honored, and privileged that this session is being led by two of my amazing colleagues, Arwina Vallejo and Loren Bohlen. So without further ado, Arwina, take it away.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to be with you virtually this morning. I'm joined today by my colleague, Loren Bohlen, who is the Executive Director of Regional Partnerships and Transition. And I'm also joined by Lauren Sullivan, Director of Evaluations and Eligibility. And we have a wonderful group of school-based school psychologists who will be walking us through some of the best practices that they are engaging in their schools. So we're very excited about that. All right, so let's start going through some of our goals for today.
I just need some access for screen sharing, please. Who is the host?
Navi, can we promote Lauren Sullivan? And Lauren, you should be able to
There we
share
go.
now.
Great. All right. Good morning, everyone.
All right. Wonderful. So thanks, Lauren. So our goals during this time today are to share a brief overview of the special education assessment policy, to review the components of the comprehensive data-driven assessment model, to support the sustainability of partnering across home and school, and to connect to considerations for least restrictive environment recommendations. All right, so let's start with our assessment policy. Thanks. In collaboration with the UFT, a remote process for psychoeducational evaluations was launched in the spring. This data collection process is completed remotely and allowed clinicians to address open student referrals using a completely remote process. It includes the analysis of multiple sources of data. It calls psychologists to do what they're trained to do, to analyze, to consult, to think deeply and critically, and ultimately to make connections using patterns of strengths and weaknesses to understand a student's learning profile in a comprehensive manner. In the summer, organizations such as the National Association of School Psychologists, the American Psychological Association, shared significant concerns with the continued use of standardized norm reference assessments once schools reopened. So we have to keep in mind that our students have faced circumstances that are unique to them during this global pandemic, And to say that our traditional norm reference tests are as valid and as reliable as they used to be is a leap. Assessments such as the WISC, the Stanford Binet, the Wyatt, and others that are normed on a population of students are normed on the population of students that they're intended to assess. However, our students who have been through a pandemic, who have been through significant stressors and a change to remote learning for months are not represented in that norming sample. So at this moment, there's a lot of caution that we have to exercise around the over-reliance on what is familiar to us. So like traditional face-to-face testing. So here we are. It's the fall, and we continue to stand behind a remote model of assessment, comprehensive data-driven assessment. We've strengthened training for clinicians and school staff. Is face-to-face testing available? Absolutely it is. When it's necessary, and even then we want to make sure that it's very targeted to the referral question. And when interpreted, clinicians will do so with caution and they'll consider the weight of factors that may have impacted these results. Let's go to that next slide, Loren. Thanks. All right, so while there are changes to the assessment process, I can assure you that what has not changed is our commitment to providing high quality evaluations. So let's walk through what this looks like in action. First, a student who requires a psychoeducational evaluation, a psychologist will conduct a comprehensive data-driven assessment. One of the critical components of this model is the teacher pre-assessment form that provides us information about cognitive skills, academic functioning, social emotional functioning, remote scales. Rating forms are also a part of that data that's collected. And then that information is analyzed, a report is written, and if sufficient information is available, we're going to move to an IEP meeting. But if there are open questions from the psychologist, then there may be a clinical need for targeted face-to-face testing. And if parents have those open questions, we also want to hear from you. The goal is to make sure that our referral question is answered with specificity to the disability, if the student's eligible for classification, and to align our services recommended with the goal of meeting the needs of the student. I'm really happy today that we have a group of school-based school psychologists who are our real experts and our superheroes. Lauren Sullivan is going to join me as a co-moderator to our virtual roundtable, and we will be asking our psychologists questions around the comprehensive data-driven assessment model, RTI, considerations for face-to-face assessment, as well as connecting this to the new continuum. So let's get started. Welcome, Claudia Alvarez, Brenda Figueroa, Dr. Vicki Mammano, Dr. Soye Zaid Mohammed, and Dr. Manal Zoabi. Can you each say a brief hello, whether you're a monolingual psychologist or bilingual, and what district you're from?
Hi, Claudia Alvarez. I'm representing District 2.
Hi, Brenda Figueroa, District 19.
Dr. Mammano, District 20.
Good morning, Dr. Soye Zaid Mohammed, District 2, PS 89, IS 289.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Manal Zoabi, and I'm from District 20.
Excellent, great. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves and for being here with us to share with the audience some of your experiences with our assessment policy for the 2021 school year. Let's start with our first question, and I'll direct my first question to Soye. Soye, can you please share some of the best practices that you find have been most impactful when developing high quality, comprehensive data-driven assessments for students?
Thank you for your question, Lauren. Thank you, Arwina, for the opportunity to present, and thank you to the entire community that's here today. And the first thing I'd love to say and share with you all is that the comprehensive data-driven assessment model, which I will refer to as the CDA model from here on out, has been best practice for quite some time. We've always done it. When we really think about it, the comprehensive data-driven assessment approach has always been best practice for evaluating students across a multitude of systems. Now, the thing about this is it's my pleasure to sort of present to the community that we've heard you over the past couple of decades and expressing your concerns about an over-reliance on the standardized testing model. And the CDDA is a process that responds to that concern. It's come from parents, educators, advocates for many years, and it rightfully states that, we're not only overly relying on the assessment practice, the standardized model, but also, we're lacking that information that comes from the people that spend the most time with the child. We've heard you. And I think that CDDA is not just a knee-jerk reaction to COVID-19, but it's been a culmination of ways of improving the assessment practices. And I'm grateful that we have it. Now, the traditional assessment model has held that evaluations for service come mostly through testing, but can include some data from other qualitative sources. I believe this is backward. I would argue that the CDDA is the best practice that can and should include some face-to-face testing when necessary. Much in the way in a medical setting, you don't necessarily provide pre-op procedures and surgery for everyone that has a headache. We can actually gain a great deal of information to spackle in the gaps from the testing just by asking the right question to people from that child's community. So there are 3 reasons, and it's very brief, and that is there's a systems approach. I think that the CDDA is a unique scale that assigns equal weights to the multiple systems that impact the learning of our children. It's a mixed methodology approach. So in other words, not just the quantitative testing that we're used to, but also valuing the importance, the information that comes from our parents, from our providers in the community, such as pediatricians, and also the voice of our teachers. And the mixed methodology also involves using CDDA and as a model in a way that provides valuable information from a multiplicity of sources. And as I mentioned before, it spackles in the gaps that could come with just relying on the standardized quantitative number-based data. And then finally, there are more voices. More voices strengthen the process, strengthens the practice. Now, the voice emanating from what I would call a cold machine of standardized testing has become the loudest and the most powerful voice in the assessment practice over the past 30 years. And I think that if one voice becomes too powerful, the others will acquiesce into silence, and we're not able to bring in the information that really matters when it comes to making decisions. So in summary, while the CDDA has been utilized throughout history, especially in the special education evaluation, I think it is underemphasized in terms of its necessity and its significance. And I believe that that's changed for the better. And with the shift to this CDDA model to better support and educate our children, we can help our children to learn and overcome disabilities no matter what level of functioning or no matter what language or what background they're functioning at. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. That was a very comprehensive answer to help us understand the practices specific to you and your school building as well. Brenda, did you have anything that you wanted to add, possibly an example as a bilingual school psychologist?
Sure. Adding to what Dr. Mohammed shared, the concept of comprehensive data-driven assessments should not be new. And reiterating what he said, should not be new to school psychologists, especially those of us that are trained to evaluate culturally and linguistically diverse students. Historically, multilingual learners are not fairly represented in standardized assessments, as Arwina said in her opening statement. Therefore, as a bilingual clinician, I'm called to utilize an ecological framework in the assessment of multilingual learners, and pretty much to be creative in that process, where the evaluator looks at the child holistically, looking at the entire child. That includes the comprehensive data-driven assessment information. And the CDDA process addresses issues of fairness with respect to the norm sample representation, because as we know, they're not represented in the norm sample. So getting back to the ecological model, I believe that the ecological model provides the school psychologist with the framework to systematically assess multilingual learners in a non-discriminatory manner, which was what we were trained to do. And as stated earlier, it addresses the concerns regarding fairness and equity in the assessment process. this collaborative approach, which I like that word more than the ecological approach, because it is a collaboration. Well, through this collaborative approach and through the collection of multiple sources of information, we include reviewing all records for the child, the CUME files, relevant records. We include observations. We include conducting parent, teacher, and student interviews. The social history is taken into consideration, including the medical history of the child. We analyze current and previous teacher reports. Our new flexible assessment forms also can be provided to previous teachers and old teachers. We now have multiple rating scales that are available to us through multiple platforms that the DOE has made available to clinicians in the DOE. We also collect sample classwork. We analyze student academic performance across multiple years, which we should have been doing before. But specific to multilingual learners, I say that we're able to determine language proficiency when we are reviewing records and previous records. We can also include the acculturation rates. All of this serves to develop a data-driven hypothesis. And regarding to the student and regarding the referral question. So I think that after completing the comprehensive data-driven assessment, school psychologists are better able to develop culturally and linguistically appropriate interventions and recommendations that address not only the academic, but the social, emotional, and the language supports that the student might need. I think we have another question. Dr. Mohammed?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So we're going to jump to response to intervention. And thank you so much, Brenda, for making that, Brenda and Dr. Mohammed for making that connection for us. So Dr. Zoabi, this question's for you. How does the response to intervention, the RTI process, preschool closure during remote instruction, and now through blended learning model, inform the remote assessment process and the possible determination of targeted face-to-face assessment?
Thank you so much, Arwina. Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here this morning with all of you. This is a very important question, but just to review, because we're all coming to this forum from very different entry points, I just want to review what RTI and response to intervention is. And what it is essentially is this academic intervention that provides early, systematic, and appropriately intensive instruction to children who are at risk or currently underperforming in comparison to same age peers. And further, I'd like to acknowledge the importance of the student re-engagement process following the COVID-19 shutdown and its implication for both RTI and special education referral. The shutdown caused a disruption, as we know, to over 1 million students within the New York City Department of Education. This was an unprecedented yet collective experience. Students, teachers, parents were tossed into a new reality that impacted everyone's education, but especially our struggling learners. And as clinicians, we must ask ourselves before we even consider special education referral, a number of questions. One could be, have students had the chance to re-engage with school for an appropriate amount of time? And this includes making meaningful social emotional connections with peers and teachers. Other questions may include, have students who are considering for special education referral made some progress in certain academic areas over others, or no progress at all? Among these questions are countless others. But for the sake of time, I'll jump ahead to the time that we do decide to proceed with special education referral. And the decision now is made very much in the same way that it was pre-COVID. And it starts with a focus on RTI outcomes. When executed with fidelity, the RTI and record review process provides us with a wealth of information regarding a profile of a student's strengths and weaknesses, their learning differences, learning preferences, and successful strategies utilized in the classroom to differentiate and enhance instruction. These, along with our new access to remote rating skills, teacher and parent interviews, student interviews, and classroom observations, all included in that comprehensive data-driven assessment, CDDA, provide us with crucial information to make sound educational decisions that may be effective, that may be used to create very effective IEPs. As Arwina stated, in the most pressing cases, we can identify a referral question that centers on the student's specific delay in order to plan for a targeted in-person assessment. Targeted in-person assessments are only one piece of the puzzle that clinicians may decide to use. These assessments may look very different depending upon the referral question. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples, just what that might look like. A student suspected of a reading disorder may be assessed using verbal comprehension indices from one or more IQ tests, specific reading subtests from one or more achievement tests, as well as reading specific scales such as the Shaywitz dyslexia screen, the GORT, the Gray Oral Reading Test, or the FAR, the Pfeiffer Assessment of Reading, to name a few. Targeted assessment of students suspected of a writing disorder may include a combination of visual motor tasks, executive functioning tasks, and achievement subtests that focus on written expression. To target a disorder in mathematics, a clinician may choose to include tests of quantitative reasoning on IQ tests or mathematics achievement tests from one or more achievement measures. These are only 3 possible scenarios in a plethora of others, depending upon the referral question. Now, such targeted assessments must take place following the CDDA process to ensure a thorough review of those ecological experiences that were identified by Dr. Mohammed and Brenda earlier. And perhaps most important to note in all of this is that anytime we do an in-person assessment, it really needs to be interpreted with caution due to the current circumstances. The evaluation and assessment process, while different now, is still comprehensive and effective in its ability to identify learning delays in our students. I know I speak for many of our colleagues when I say that we look forward to working on IEP teams to create effective, inclusive plans that will ultimately support students on their educational journeys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Zoabi. All right, Dr. Mammano, the next question is for you. If targeted face-to-face assessment is determined necessary to answer the referral question, we know that there'll be an initial conversation with families. Can you share some of the information that you communicate to families during this time, specifically about the process of assessment?
Certainly. I believe that it's even more crucial in this day and age that we touch base with parents and before the evaluation even starts to find out some of the concerns that they may have with their children re-entering school that might impact on their learning. So I think it's important that we lend a supportive hand before we even start the process. So moving to the process, I think it's crucial that we not only give the parents their informed consent, but we start to begin to develop a sense of trust between the professionals and the families. This is an important part, especially since we're not in the building. So the comprehensive assessment is very unique in a way that it bridges the trust between professionals and families. And that's because of the nature of the transparencies of the assessments. In more traditional assessments, parents are usually given the end results of the product, not so much as how the child got there. They're not privy to the questions. They're not privy to anything other than the end results and the explanation of those results. In best practice, parents should be involved in all aspects of the assessments and not just the social history and the end results of the assessments. This not only alleviates the anxiety over the assessment process, but provides a psychologist with the wealth of information about the child, the parent's perception of the child's abilities, and the parent's expectations of the child's skills and of the assessment process. What do they actually hope to get of this process? What are their fantasies in terms of what the end result might impact on their child? All very important features of the process. The CDDA and the nature of the scales that are used often have parallel forms for teachers and parents. So you can get a full picture of the student from a variety of sources and lenses. These comparative scales are wonderful resources to open up discussion with parents to help them see the true nature of what's going on. For example, I recently worked with a family that I gave assessment scales to a morning teacher, or afternoon teacher, and the parent. And after they were scored, I was able to pull the information together visually through graphs and explain to the parent how, even though the profile looks similar, the intensity of the skills were very different depending on who answered the scales. This information is crucial for parents to understand discrepancies that they often hear from the teacher versus their information of how the child functions at home. So exploring these differences and explaining these differences to the parents really helps them get a good picture of how the assessment process is unfolding and how crucial they are in the assessment process. So the parents become data. They become part of the data to be shared in this process. The in-depth pre-assessments are completed by the teachers along with multidisciplines. That adds another piece of this information and a source of discussion to the parents. The pre-assessment is set up according to different cognitive functions that directly translate into academic school tasks. This is a crucial piece of information when explaining to parents why children aren't learning. For example, if on this pre-assessment scale, a weakness is memory, and then as you scroll down to different sections, you notice that in math, a child has difficulty executing verbal word problems, although his calculation skills are great. We can always then put it together that the child, one hypothesis, the child might have memory issues, so that the child can hold in memory all the information needed to execute the task. But when you remove all that, right, the child's able to do it. So making these types of tasks and examples available to parents, they begin to see why their child might be struggling across situations. Often parents come in and say, oh, you know, my child has trouble remembering. Okay, but our job is to explain what cognitive areas impact, what weaknesses impact on the ability to learn, and how we can support that. This is a very meaningful conversation to the parent. Concrete examples: reliability, conversation. The other thing I really like about the CDDA, it gives the ability to collect data in an unlimited way. You're no longer tied to a battery of kits, right? Student observations becomes a very crucial part of this process. In best practice, it's always good to observe students over multiple situations, right, in a naturalistic learning environment. Observing a child while learning, with or without scaffolds, gives us information about the child's learning rate, skill acquisition, and learning style. For example, if you observe a child doing a task and teachers introduce scaffolds, looking at the process by which those scaffolds may or may not be working really does help us address the learning process and what we need to do to intervene to make that child learn optimally. I recently had the pleasure of observing a child through a Zoom classroom collectively with the parent. That gave me another advantage of pointing out to the parent after the meeting what she saw as some of the issues and what I saw as some of the issues. Again, conversation, making the parent feel a collaborative part of the process. This is really the essence of what we do and the essence of what we need to discover to help our children succeed. Gathering information, coming up with hypotheses, sharing it with parents and family, making them feel part of the process. After all, assessments have never been about the scores. It's always been about the process in which these scores are obtained. Having multiple sources really brings a growth of ability, a broad spectrum of information, so that we can make the best possible decisions for our students. Working as a collaborative team with our parents will enable us to lock the secrets of what exactly our students need. It will enable us to provide our students with the very best educational plan, working as a team. This will ensure our students.
We're going to give you a 30-minute warning just because we have to move on. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for your comprehensive answer and really detailing the process for us. Our next question is going to go to Claudia Alvarez, school psychologist from District 2. Claudia, can you please share with us and the audience some of the best practices that you find have been most impactful in developing high quality IEPs and really including parents in this process?
Good morning, everyone. So the IEP development process hasn't really changed much during these times. In fact, I think it's enhanced the collaboration that's involved in developing these IEPs. The first step that I always take is going the route of seeking parental outreach. So when a referral does come through, we engage with the parents about their referral concern and break down the aspects of what they perceive their child's needs to be. We do this outreach also with the teachers. And this oftentimes happens even before a referral is opened because we rely on the RTI process to help guide us in the next steps. And we look to see what interventions have been tried, find out what the teacher's own impressions of their students are, what do the recent learning assessments reveal about the student. And we look to see really if the referral concern matches with what the teacher sees in the classroom. It's also really important to note that during these unprecedented times, that our teachers have been really dedicated allies in our attempts to provide our students with what they need. And as such, we don't rely solely on the current teacher's information, but we also rely on the input of last year's teacher to make very thoughtful comparisons about how they see the student has adjusted to transitions from fully in-person to a remote blended model. These discussions can often lead to similarities and discrepancies, but those are welcomed, and it's helpful to determine what sort of learning modalities and resources were utilized and rule out what has been helpful or not. And the same can be said about the home and school collaboration. If the student was successful in using strategies and interventions that can be generalized between the home and school setting, this is also very helpful to parents who are trying to support their children at home with their own homework or any other resources that they need to provide for school. With this information, we can explore items such as rating scales that are helpful during these times because it allows for very clear objective responses by multiple parties involved in the student's learning. Also, things like a social history update are helpful in the sense that it gives us a more complete, less school-based outlook on the student's overall functioning. Knowing how they engage their time outside of school, hobbies or interests that they excel in,
familial history are all components that are important to consider when planning how to best assess a student, either when using a norm referenced assessment or the CDDA approach. The factors that contribute to what we include in the IEP, because we wanted, like my colleague said before, a holistic view of the student. And this will allow for teachers and therapists and whoever work with the student to understand what opportunities can make the student more successful and be creative in how we service the students. In terms of composing a high quality IEP, it should really be a snapshot of the child. The language should be parent friendly, as they may not always understand the psychological or educational jargon. The IEP should reflect the most current data regarding the student and should really update the parents on the progress as compared to last year's IEP. Everyone's voice, the parent, the teacher, the therapist, clinician, even the student, should be reflected in the IEP. The goals should be aligned with the needs that are reflected in the present levels of performance, and we create an IEP that really reflects the complete package of the student. And because the IEP is a living, breathing document, we make adjustments as needed in order to ensure that we provide our students with their best opportunities to be successful and also celebrate when these students have met their goals. The IEP process has not changed, and we hope that moving forward, using these different types of ways to assess our children will make us more thoughtful clinicians and make our recommendations most appropriate.
Great, thank you so much, Claudia. So many clinicians have shared that parents are playing a bigger role now more than ever in the evaluation and IEP development process. So we appreciate you highlighting some of those practices. Great, okay. So what we're going to do now is have our last question from Soye. Hopefully you can answer in 30 seconds that we have remaining before we move on. And that's really a connection we'd like to make post-evaluation. As a school psychologist and member of the IEP team, how can you really ensure that recommended programs and services explore the full continuum and ensure that the student is recommended for services in the least restrictive environment? Can you share how you walk parents through that continuum, please?
Right. Sure, 30 seconds, right?
Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I could probably do it in 10. Visualization. I think when you're at your IEP meeting, I think when social workers are in their social history meeting, I think a wonderful visual aid is important. We keep one in our office in the form of a poster or a slide projection that shows parents the entire process up to and including every recommendation from the continuum all the way down to the recommendations for accommodations. When you go to an airport has about 1 billion people that come through it per year. What if every one of those people had questions? They never get the flights off the ground. So when you go to an airport, the visual directions, without you having to ask any questions, helps to direct you to a gate or to the concession stand or the restroom. Our process has to be the same way. There has to be some kind of visual guide that allows the parents to answer questions as the IEP meeting is in process.
Great, thank you so much. And thanks for your condensed answer. So post-evaluation process, we move to the IEP development and recommendation stage if appropriate. So I'd like to transition to Loren Bohlen now, who will walk us through some of that decision-making and how we support IEP teams and families. Hi, Loren.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you so much. It's so great to hear from all of you about how this information is being put into action to the benefit of families and students. And so it's really exciting work. I'm especially thrilled to hear what Dr. Muhammad just shared about visualizations, but we'll get to why in a moment. So this very quickly, we don't have to stay here, but you know, I like to just remind people of what we're talking about. If you could go back for just 10 seconds, thanks. When we talk about LRE, because sometimes LRE is a term that we use and we kind of throw it around often. It's grounded in the law and regulatory requirements, obviously, but something that's really important to remember as we engage in meaningful conversations through the IEP development process is that general education settings are our first thought, right? That's where we start, and that students are only removed from those educational settings when the nature and severity of the disability is such, as it says, that even with the use of supplementary aids and services, education cannot be satisfactorily achieved. So it really means broadening our thinking about what can be provided in more inclusive settings, and just really grounding our thinking in that. And so when we think about the guiding principles that we use and the shared understanding that we have when we're going through the decision-making process, the first one is that all students must have a sense of belonging and acceptance, inspired and reinforced by their school community. That means that we're not allowing a particular student to be part of the community. They are a part of the community, just like every other student is a part of the community. You know, there's no special thing that a student has to do in order to be permitted into that community, if you will. And secondly, as we just said, if we push enter, the next one will come up, I think, thanks, that general education is always the first consideration for any student with an IEP. Thirdly, decision-making regarding special education services is a team process inclusive of the family and student, as we heard from some of our panelists. And finally, that supplementary aids and services, accommodations, modifications, and specially designed instruction can and should be provided in the general education classroom. So keeping those principles in mind as we engage, like I said, in the process is super important. Some other important key concepts, and I'm going to do this quickly because I know we're almost out of time, but when we are thinking about program and service recommendations for each individual student and what that student's least restrictive environment is, we're really also thinking about an additional concept, excuse me. We're thinking about restrictiveness, which is defined or measured rather as the percentage of time a student spends with their non-disabled peers and also their proximity to home. And we also think about a second idea, which is the intensity of the service. And we measure intensity by the student to staff ratio and also by the frequency of the service. So visual representation of the continuum of services, if you just push enter one more time, there we go. Thank you for driving. So, you know, Dr. Mohammed mentioned visuals. This is an updated visual of our continuum of services and programs and placements. And I know that we're almost out of time, but I'll just point out a couple of things. The darker green, kind of forest green at the bottom is general education. And we include ICT and sets in the general education classroom because those are inclusive settings. As we go up, there are less inclusive settings, if you will, special class, home and hospital, but all along, all of those are related services, supplementary aids and services, et cetera. They can be received across settings. We know this. And just one more comment, that the different shadings represent different levels of intensity. So if you look at that middle part where it says special class, that's a special class within a regular school, perhaps. There are different shadings because there can be different student to staff ratios. For example, 12 students to one teacher, 8 students to one teacher, and one paraprofessional. In addition, a student can have the benefit of that special class for a period of the day and not the whole day. So those are different ways that the intensity can differ along with the restrictiveness when we're making thoughtful decisions about students with IEPs. And you know, just to end, because I know we're at time, but I kind of want to bring this back to something that Christina Foti said in her opening remarks. which had to do with interdependency and every child benefiting from being an included part of a very diverse group of students. And I think that this is this is another chart showing intensity and restrictiveness and the different ways to think about it. So I think that we probably won't have time to go into detail, but one thing that I do want to share with everybody on the call is that these slides come out of a document that is posted on the Info Hub currently. And so we will certainly make sure that everyone has the link to that document. And if you have any questions, you'll have our contact information. I know that there are a few questions in the chat as well that we would love to answer following the session, and we're happy to do that. But we can go on to the next slide and wrap things up because I know that
Thanks, Loren.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope that the major understanding you're leaving with is that this IEP and evaluation process is student-centered. As we shift to the comprehensive data-driven assessment model, our goal remains the same, that students receive high-quality evaluations and associated developed IEPs if appropriate as well. The student always remains the center of that process. We're always looking to answer the referral concern, use strong specific data that is appropriate to answering the referral concern, and then if appropriate, recommending that program and or service placement recommendations as well that are really looking to promote inclusivity and equity for students in the least restrictive environment. So I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us today, speaking to us about how they make this practice work in action on a daily basis. Arwina is right in calling them superheroes in a time when things are tough, especially now. They are really keeping the student in the front of the process and making sure all high quality evaluations are developed for students. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you all of our panelists. Thank you our presenters. If you're sticking around for the sensory strategies, we have about 13-minute break. So I encourage you to take a break, walk around, get a snack, go see our vendors, meet our vendors, and we'll see you back here at 11:15.
Thank you for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you.